welcome everyone to our When is Your Equal Pay Day webinar, and thank you for understanding the shift to webinar mode. I understand that that's made life easier for a lot of people, but I also recognise that some are really looking forward to going to the State Library and seeing some of our speakers in person. Hopefully we'll be able to do that again in the future, but for now, we are going to be running our event as a webinar. My name is Michaela Dreberg and I'm the CEO of Gender Equity Victoria. For those of you that have not heard of Gender Equity Victoria, it's the peak body representing organisations and individuals that are working towards intersectional gender equality. But before I introduce you to Chris Buckingham, that's joined us today as well, I do want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people and pay respect to elders that are joining us today, past and emerging as well. Given our topic is looking at the gender pay gap, I also wanted to acknowledge that not all women are the same, not all people are the same, and we know that our First Nations people have an even greater gender pay gap. And so where we will be focusing on today and talking generally about the gender pay gap, we'll also reinforce throughout today's session that it is a different experience for different people. I'll now pass on to Chris Buckingham, that's joined us from the Fairco and had a recent name brand. So Chris, please tell us a little bit more about the Fairco.
Hello, Michaela, and hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. Yes, Chris Buckingham from the Fairco. We're on Wurundjeri land too. So we were the artist formerly known as Jobs Bank. And what we've found is that people are continually confused by our name. So we changed our name and now people seem to understand and appreciate us better. And we're delighted, can I just say, Michaela, to be working with Gen Vic on this particular project, and I'm really looking forward to what will be a great session. We're a social enterprise, we're a not-for-profit, we're a consultancy that advises government agencies and companies on how to be better, particularly as it relates to social procurement framework, but other regulatory pieces that contribute to fairer workplaces in particular, but also stronger, I guess, more equitable economies. So this particular topic, near and dear to us as a team, and yes, just delighted as a social enterprise to be able to contribute back to growing understanding and knowledge of the gender pay gap. And can I just make a very short observation as a bloke in the room, that this is a task, a big task that requires everybody to pull their weight. This is not about asking women to do the shouting. This is about actually men getting in, leaning in and supporting mature conversations that will contribute to fairness for everybody. So let's bring on today and looking forward to participating. Thank you.
I just wanted to also talk about the purpose of today's session. So Chris and I got together a while ago now to discuss what we could potentially do to really look at workplace gender equality, more inclusive workplaces, and how we could work together with our different audiences to bring together corporates that are working in this space, as well as the for-purpose sectors, and how we can strengthen the work that we're already doing together. And so when our Equal Pay Day was looming and the Workplace Gender Equality Agency came to us and suggested that this is the day that we all work together, it just seemed to work really well. So as you are all aware, Equal Pay Day was yesterday. I won't go into the details of what it entails because I'm sure Mary will speak to that as well. But today is really focused on, rather than talking about some of the awful statistics that we're all well aware of, it's focused on solutions. So what do we know that works? And we have been joined by a really fantastic panel of speakers I'll introduce as we go throughout today's session, that will bring their different perspectives and their different examples of what works. So throughout today's session, and if you're taking notes and you're getting ideas, it's really focused on the one action that you can take as an individual, but also collectively in your workplaces as well. So I'll now pass on to Mary Wooldridge, who is our keynote speaker for today. Mary will be of no stranger to you. She's the CEO of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, but in a prior life was the Minister for Women. So is very familiar with the building we're in today, and it has a really long and rich history of advocating for gender equality. So I will pass on to Mary now, who will share some of her wisdom with us.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Michaela. And it's wonderful to be here with you in the Queen Vic Women's Centre, a very special place in Victoria and in Melbourne. And I too would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners who've loved and nurtured the land that we're meeting on here in Melbourne, but I'm sure right across the country for many thousands of generations. It's also wonderful to be able to connect with people on the day after Equal Pay Day. And the idea of the next few minutes, I'm going to just give a bit of context and some of the bigger picture in terms of not only, you know, what's happening in gender equality, but also the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, if any of the people on the call today aren't familiar, and set up the conversation really for three fabulous practitioners who are on the panel and a broader discussion from people on the call in terms of where you want to pursue the conversation. So first of all, the question we've been asking this year is, when's your Equal Pay Day? And Equal Pay Day it basically represents the 50 extra days that women have to work on average to earn the same as men did in the last financial year. And we highlight this day every year. It's really important mechanism to take the gender pay gap, which is a percentage and a bit nebulous, and make it tangible in terms of you know, the relativity between men and women in terms of pay in the workplace. And this year, because at the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, we have a huge amount of information in order to try and capture people's imagination. Not only were we talking about the National Day, which is 50 days, 19th of August, but also saying, well, why don't you find out what your Equal Pay Day is for your workplace, and set up this nifty little calculator that you can see on the screen, which shows that you can go to the Workplace Gender Equality's Data Explorer, which is this amazing treasure trove of information about employers and industries and their performance against a whole range of gender equality metrics, and find out your employer's gender pay gap, put it in, and have the actual number of days. Now, when you go and find those number of days, not only does that give you that information, but there is also, you know, the rest of the information about your employer. What's the composition? How does that split up between managers and non-managers? What's your board look like? What are policies and practices in place? How does your employer say they consult with people on gender equality? And what policies and accountabilities are there around things like sexual harassment and discrimination? So I encourage everyone, and do it while we're talking if you want, or do it afterwards. Go to the Data Explorer if you haven't already, and click through and look at the data for where you work, as well as the industry and the nation, but use our calculator to say, well, how does our workplace measure up? And the campaign's gone well. We've had thousands of people use this calculator to date, and hopefully that's thousands more people who are informed, have a little bit of fact and evidence, and then are supported to be able to take that into their workplace to have a conversation more broadly. And just as background, if you don't know, the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, we're an independent statutory authority at the federal government level, and every company with 100 or more employees reports to us every year on their gender equality performance. Our objective is to use that information to then generate broad conversations, but also specific conversations and change in individual workplaces. And I'll touch on a few things that we do to try and help be a catalyst for the change that we need to see. So the other thing I want to do is just give a little bit of context about the last 10 years, and hopefully our progress report, which reflects on that, will be tabled in the Parliament in the next week or two, which will give all the facts and figures against the metrics that we collect. But overall, change is happening. The challenge is that progress is too slow. The gender pay gap's been coming down over the last 10 years. We've got employers doing analysis and actually getting the data that sits behind it. Once again, significant improvements. We've had translation of the number of women on boards up substantially, but still incredibly, a quarter of all boards have no women on them at all. which is really, I think, quite a stunning statistic. And we know from the evidence base that having, a balance of genders on boards as well as in senior management level actually does lead to a fundamental translation to improvement in gender equality across the board in an employer. The proportion of managers are up, but we still only have 1 in 5 CEOs who are women. And actually the highest gender pay gap across all manager and non-manager types is at the CEO level. And this is just data that we've collected for the first time in the last year, a 25% gender pay gap of CEOs. So even women who are succeeding at the most senior levels of their organisations are experiencing that differential between pay in relation to their roles. A good indicator, and to the point Chris was making about everyone, gender equality affects everyone, and it's an important part of the conversation, is we also monitor the uptake of primary carers leave by men and women. And this is an area where we've seen a fundamental shift, even just in the last few years. While the numbers are still low, 17% of primary carers leave is taken by men. We know, though, that that is dramatically changing, and once again, a signal of the translation of sort of conversations, policies and ideas into practical reality on the ground of, the idea about carers leave, shifting that notion of who the primary caregiver needs to be, and creating cultures where people, both men and women, can feel confident taking primary leave, carers leave, and it not being detrimental to their careers. We track a lot of information about policies, and there's been substantial information across the improvement across the board. Interestingly, the big shift just in the last few years has been family and domestic violence leave, and policies across the board as being an area that's really been come from a very low base, but that's been as a result of a lot of advocacy, government support, putting it into the national employment standards. We're seeing a big translation of change at that level too. Just a little context for WGEA as well, which is important. And we are different from anywhere else in the world. And it's a credit, we're actually turning 40 next year. It's a credit to 40 years of advocacy and support across, changing governments and changing environments. But still, absolutely fundamental to the workplace and the regulatory environment in relation to gender equality. So in our current form, the Act was passed in 2012 and reporting came into place in 2014. What we saw, though, is the benefits of reporting had definitely played out, but progress was stalling. So there was a significant review in 2021. And the outcomes of that are in the process of being implemented. Changes to enable the publication of employer gender pay gaps to have been really important to bringing transparency and accountability to the most senior levels of organisations in place, and I'll touch a little bit on the impact that that's had, but also making sure that the board's engaged, that we incorporate CEO salaries, because we know with, at least more than 75% of CEOs being men and then the highest paid, that's incorporated into our thinking and analysis, and a much more comprehensive collection of data about policies, practices and performance in relation to sexual harassment and discrimination as a result of the work around respect at work. We've also included the Commonwealth in the data set, which has been great as well. And we've been rolling out those changes in the last few years, publishing private sector gender pay gaps, Commonwealth sector, public sector pay gaps, and target setting is the next part of that. And the target setting's important because it expands the expectations of government from just reporting about what they're doing on gender equality to actually now requiring companies to set targets and improve in terms of their performance. So if you haven't seen it, and hopefully many of you have, or as I say, jump onto the Data Explorer, we've published a lot of information. Not only did we publish gender pay gaps, we've also published the gender composition by pay quartile, which is very telling because it's really important about, and what we see, and that's the national results, is you're 1.9 times more likely to be in the highest earning quartile if you're a man than a woman, and you're 50% more likely to be in the lowest quartile if you're a woman than a man. The other thing we've published, which has been interesting, is the average total REM by those pay quartiles. And I loved it last year, earlier this year, when we published that information for the first time. It was called by the Fin Review as the biggest pay transparency exercise ever undertaken in this country, because now we know that information across not only nationally, industries, but also in individual workplaces. And lots has happened, and it's really positive from an employee perspective, because more companies are narrowing their gender pay gap, more companies are undertaking detailed analysis and taking action from it. A big shift is that employers are consulting with employees more to inform their decision-making around change. So a lot of these metrics were actually quite stuck. So publishing gender pay gaps has been that catalyst into the environment that is shifting that dynamic of more employers needing to understand what's driving their differentials and more engagement with employees about what needs to change and how it can be fixed. We've also seen some fascinating things. I won't go through all the detail, but there's a lot more accountability around this. We're hearing that job seekers are asking questions in interviews around gender pay gaps and workforce composition and policies, when they're looking at taking particular jobs. CEOs are being held accountable by their boards, but also by the media and more broadly in terms of what they're doing. Even investors for listed companies are asking at shareholder meetings and those sorts of things. It was great that the CEO of the Commonwealth Bank was asked at the annual meeting about their gender pay gap performance, why it's so high and what they're doing about it. So, the transparency is making a big difference. So the new thing, as I've said, is the gender equality targets, and this is going to cover about 2,000 employers employing 4 million Australians. And what they need to do is initially select and commit to achieve targets, and then demonstrate that they either meet them or demonstrate improvement at the end of 3 years. And there's a menu that they can choose from, but it's important that at least one must be numeric. So we actually need to see not only action, but we need to see outcomes in terms of the target setting process. And once again, we'll be publishing the targets that are selected, and there's consequences of non-compliance. Now that's going to happen over the next year will be the first time employers will select them. So just wanted to finish up by saying, that's the broader context, and we'll get into the details in terms of, what works, what doesn't, and people's experiences. But please think of WGEA as an incredible resource. We've got a fabulous website that has that data explorer, but also lots of tools, lots of guides. We run masterclasses, advisory sessions. We've got a newsletter that tells you what's new. Please go to the WGEA website and, utilise all the information and both data and guidance in relation to that. So that's it from me. Michaela, I'll hand back to you and the panel, and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Mary. That's a lot of food for thought, and I think really sets the tone for understanding the context that we're in, and then we'll add value from each of the panellists that we speak as we go. But because I've got the virtual microphone, I'm going to ask one question whilst I have you before we go on to the panellists. And you mentioned some of the changes or not changes that we've seen with boards, and in particular how there's still 26% of boards that don't have any women represented. What role do you feel that boards play in terms of closing the gender gap?
Well, it's fundamental, and in fact the evidence does show that boards do play a fundamental role, and it's not just having one woman on the board as well. It does need to be, a more balanced board, and we aim for 40-40, at least 40% women, at least 40% men, and, flexibility in terms of the other remaining 20%. And we think both the board and the CEO and C-suite set the authorising environment for this to happen. And that's part of why we are requiring, the legislation now requires the WGEA reports that we provide to management to actually be provided to the board as well. So they can hold the CEO and the executive accountable for their performance in relation to it, because really what we're talking about is people. And so much for so many companies, the competitive advantage or the thing that makes the difference between being a successful employer and organisation and not is people, how you retain people, how you support them to use their full ranges of skills and capabilities. And so the board has an accountability, has to hold the CEO and the C-suite accountable for their performance in relation to people and the policies, practice in place, and the priority that it places on, that it's embedded as part of the broader strategy of the organisation, not seen as something nice that's on the side. The one thing for any directors on the call that we've been thinking about in terms of the most important thing we think they can do is, in their role of appointing the CEO, they can ensure that their CEO is gender attuned, and that they have an understanding, that they demonstrate experience previously, and have good examples to point to from how they've brought a gender-attuned leadership into previous roles and how they will in this role, to tackle the challenges, to embed it as part of everyday business, and to make sure that the workplace experience is equal and fair.
That's an excellent response, Mary. And I can see a couple of other questions have filtered through. So in the interest of time, I'll just raise one that you can ponder. I'll come back to it later, but it builds on the board question, and the need to ensure that we've got further diversity in the board from other intersecting aspects such as culture and the role that plays in closing gender gaps and in different industries as well. So if you want to just take that one on notice, we'll come back to that unless you have a quick response right now.
Well, I think it's absolutely right. And I think the thing that frustrates me is often the broader diversity also brings those benefits in terms of better decision-making, messages through the organisation, and we need, that diversity across the board. We're obviously gender-focused. Our Act defines us as men and women, and we're working through that because we'd like to define that more broadly in terms of gender. But it is, vital, but it's important that the diversity doesn't come from the women with other intersecting aspects of of diversity as well. So the diversity needs to be across the board, if I can explain that well, that diversity characteristics for both men and women on the board, not just that we have 50% white men still, and all the diversity is satisfied by the women and people of broad genders and other aspects of diversity. I don't think I've explained that really well, but I hope that message is clear, that the diversity needs to be across the board, and gender is one aspect of that.
You did explain that really well. It's the additional hats can't sit solely with women. It needs to be with all directors across the board. So next up, we have with us Dr. Lisa Heap. So Dr. Lisa Heap is the chair of the Victorian Government Equal Workplaces Advisory Council, but also wears several other hats, including being a director of the Gender Equity Victoria Board as well. So thanks for joining us today, Lisa. I am going to share my screen with some slides that you have shared with us today, and then I will pass on to Lisa. Over to you.
Oh, That's a good way to start with that slide. That's halfway through the presentation. So if you want to go back further, that would be really good, but it's probably going to get to the point that I'm going to talk about. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak, Michaela, and to FairCo for this great joint initiative. I'd like to recognise that I'm in West Footscray at the moment, so I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri Wurrung and Boonwurrung people, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And so as Michaela has said, I am the chairperson of the Equal Workplaces Advisory Council, which is a body that advises the Victorian Industrial Relations Minister on issues associated with gender pay equity and also women's participation in the workforce. And I'm also, in my day job, a senior researcher at the Centre for Future Work at the Australia Institute. And the Centre for Future Work is a research institute that focuses on labour market analysis. And so, you know, it's really great that in my day job I get to focus on some of these issues that we're exploring in detail today. So I'm going to go to the next slide, thanks, Michaela. And basically, this was going to work probably better when we're all going, some of us at least, were going to be in the room. But I was going to ask you all to think about what you see the problem of gender pay inequality as being. And I was going to say, take a couple of seconds to think about that issue, whether it be from yourself, from your individual point of view, or whether you be from the point of view of how in your role in the organisation you see it, or how your organisation represents that problem, or maybe if you're in policy settings, how you think policy frameworks are setting what the problem of gender pay inequality actually is. So while I'm exploring that concept, take some time to think about that and maybe even pop your ideas, if you can, in the chat about what you actually see, not the detail of what the specific problem is, but how is the problem represented in your organisation or in the roles that you play. Because how we represent the problem of gender pay inequality impacts quite considerably on what we see as the solution to that problem. If I can take, for example, the issue of sexual harassment and how that problem is represented, it has made significant impact on how we've seen the problem in the past and how we will see it in the future. So, for example, in the past, it was represented as something that happened in the individuals in workplaces. It was kind of about a few people behaving badly or a bad person doing this. It was seen as not necessarily as an organisational problem that the organisation had responsibility for, other than to get rid of occasionally those individual bad apples that were in those organisations. And even then, we know from the historical analysis that we've got that in many organisations, they didn't see the perpetrator as the problem in the sexual harassment framework. They saw the victim or the person who'd experienced sexual harassment as the problem because they were raising that issue and wanting redress. So in those contexts, if you see sexual harassment and represented as an individual problem, then you do things like you have policies, you have codes of conduct, and you have procedures for dealing with the problem, investigations and those sorts of things, and your focus is on those things if you see that as the problem of sexual harassment at work. However, if you see the problem of sexual harassment at work as being about power structures and about an outcome from the power structures that operate at work and in the labour market, and also about reinforcing those power structures, then your analysis is going to be quite different in terms of what the solutions may be. Where does power lie in this organisation or in the labour market? Addressing things like insecure work arrangements, because we know that creates an additional layer of vulnerability. That means that people who are particularly vulnerable are more exposed to violence and harassment. Gender segregated roles in organisations or in industries, because we know again that that's an environment within which sexual harassment and other forms of violence and harassment are perpetrated. And you can see, for example, other things like the other power structures that intersect with gender, race, colonisation and those sorts of things? Are they aspects? So if you represent the problem of sexual harassment as a structural problem in that way and as an outcome of the power structures in society and in the community and at work, your solutions are much bigger than that. So if we think about the issue of equal pay, then equal pay has been represented quite differently, or the issue of pay inequality has been represented quite differently through policy settings. Equal pay has been seen initially the equal pay for equal work was seen as the focus, and that was really about discrimination. So that was really about saying, okay, so we think people are not being paid the same rate of pay, women and men are not being paid the same rate of pay, that's a form of discrimination, that's where the focus was. Even when we moved to equal pay for work of equal value, or the comparable worth concept, then we moved to an idea of women in undervalued roles. And that's probably where we sit now, as at the macro level in policy, the focus on those, why are women in particular industries and areas of work valued, their work valued less than others. If you think about it as a problem of wage solidarity, as some, for example, many in the trade union might think about it, for example, trade union movement, as about all workers are not receiving the benefits of what they should have, then the analysis might be one of worker exploitation as the problem. In the past, we've seen policy at the federal level and the Commonwealth level, particularly under the Howard government, focus largely on women's choices and the issue about enabling their choices, because it was seen as choices that were being made in terms of the family structure and what they want to do and what they don't want to do. That was problematic. Some people pose the problem of women's pay inequality as women don't ask for enough. And therefore, when you think about that, then the issue is about the individual woman. And then you think about things about policy solutions as empowerment. And some people say that it's all about market forces, and so we shouldn't worry about it at all because there's no fix in that, and that's just almost naturalising the problem of pay inequality. So my challenge to you is to think through and move to this question about how do you see the problem and what is the solutions that fall from the way you see the problem. Thanks for the next slide. And I'm not going to go to the next slide in any detail, but just to say to you, one of the key things to do is to challenge in your own thinking and in other people's thinking, how is the problem being portrayed or represented, and what sits behind that? What are the presumptions or assumptions that sit behind that? What's left unproblematic if you see that the problem in that way? What's left out if you see a problem in a particular way? Are there alternative ways of representing the problem? These are all things to consider. And I'll move to the next slide. So the upshot of all that is, okay, where do I land on this? And because I'm sharing my wisdom with you all today, I land on seeing the problem as one of power structures at work and in society and community. And so what I'd like to say is that, okay, if we see it as if gender pay inequality as an outcome of the operation of power structures in our society and our community, and where gender inequality, those power structures allow for gender inequality to flourish, that means that we have to accept, in my view, that there are real interests, whether they be conscious or unconscious, that have a vested interest in keeping the power structure the way it currently is. And if that's the case, then change happens, as Mary pointed out, slowly, or change can be opposed or resisted, and we must accept that that's part of this journey that we're on. And therefore, there must be affirmative strategies to deal with this. And those affirmative strategies should be geared towards transformative objectives. And when I say transformative objectives, what do I mean? That we're seeking to transform not just, we're seeking to transform the power structures in workplaces and in the broader society and community as part of our goal of achieving pay equity. And that means, for example, what does that mean, for example, at the workplace level? well, if I go to the final slide, thanks very much, Michaela. For me, and I'm not expecting you to read all of this straight away, but I'm happy to make this available to people. But for me, it means that we have to look at this as a multi-dimensional problem, and that we have to sort of accept that we come in Australia from a very, very strong male breadwinner model in terms of how we see the labour market, and that's still there, and there's a lot of vested interests in maintaining that model the way that it is. And so we've got to, if we accept that that's part of the problem, then we've got to look at this in a multidimensional way. What do I mean by a multidimensional way? It means that we can't just focus on policies, practices that are about changing culture or changing behaviour. We also have to look at and change the structural elements. So if you can see on the right-hand side, as I'm looking at the screen, I think it's the right-hand side, there's a whole list of things that you could look as a checklist through things that you could look at your organisational level of things that you need to be thinking about. Where does precarity or precarious work happen in your organisations? Where does gender segregation happen in your organisations? Who's making the decision making? How are you evaluating merit and job evaluation processes and the like? So there's a whole lot that can be done, but consciously taking a multidimensional approach to it means that you're not going to sit just with policies. You're going to actually have, and those policies are not just going to gear in one direction. You're going to look at all of these elements, the structural, the cultural, the behavioural, and the individual elements that go to making up the environment within which gender pay inequality flourishes. Thank you.
Provided us with even more things to ponder, and really gave us some further information about what's driving some of these gender pay gaps as well. We'll come back to Lisa shortly for those of you that have got additional questions. But what we will do now is to move on to Will Stracke. So Will is joining us and will be speaking to us about some of the work that she does at the Victorian Trades Hall Council as the Assistant Secretary. But she will also, some of you are also very familiar with her in that she is a bit of a social media sensation, I think is a term that we hear. I will share some slides for Will, and you can have a chat to that as well.
Thank you very much. So I'll also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the mighty Kulin Nation, pay respects to elders past and present, extend that respect to any First Nations comrades who might have joined us here today, and acknowledge that the land was stolen, never ceded, and that it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I will just say, in this year in particular, how critical that is, that we have that solidarity with First Nations peoples here in Victoria, because the Yuruk Justice Commission has delivered their report, and we are going to be seeing treaty is currently the legislation for treaty should reach Parliament this year. So the First Peoples Assembly has been negotiating treaty, and we in the trade union movement are standing ready to do what's required to ensure that First Nations peoples in Victoria are delivered self-determination and justice as they should be. Mary talked a bit about the top-down model of making change around gender equality, the idea that it's the executives at the top that effectively set the culture that makes change. Lisa talked a bit about power and what that means. I'm going to talk to you about a bottom-up way of thinking about gender equality and gender inequality and what we do in workplaces. Because I'm going to say that in the trade union movement, while of course the glass ceiling is an issue, we don't believe that you should simply talk about the glass ceiling. We have to talk about the factory floor as well. And we have to talk about the measures that we can take to make change. And so what you see there is effectively just the summary, right? We're not going to talk about the problems. We're here because we know that there are problems. I will say that we in the trade union movement and we at the Hall have spent around 10 years now doing something called Raw Chats, which is Lisa will be very familiar with this because she helped develop it with us, a structured conversation with working women to tell us what the issues are in their workplaces and then what are the priorities in terms of fixing those. if we could go to the next slide. So in terms of unequal, there are many issues. Women don't feel safe at work and they don't feel respected. And there are a whole range of things around gender-based violence, etc., that we could talk about. But specifically when we talk about unequal pay, these are kind of the practical things that we know about why there is unequal pay in workplaces. We know that women are paid less for doing the same job. I know that that's equal pay. That's particularly the case where roles involve discretionary payments like bonuses. We know that women still do the great bulk of unpaid, unvalued work of caring for families, children, communities. And what that means on a practical level, as well as meaning that there are career breaks that women take, we also know that that means they do less overtime and they're less likely to work in the hours, the unsociable hours that attract penalty rates. So on a practical level, two people can be doing the same job, but they're doing it over different hours, which means that they're being paid differently. We also know that women are less likely to be promoted in workplaces, and we know that this isn't related to work performance. There's been an enormous amount of research that tells us that this is actually, people are promoted often in relation to their potential, and men are seen as having more potential than women, even though women may be outperforming them, actually out on the ground doing the work. We also know that women are more likely to be in part-time and insecure work. And Lisa touched on the reality that insecure work, for example, creates a barrier for workers to address the issues that they, in fact, may know are in the workplace. And we know that women are clustered in low-paid industries and roles, and that there are barriers to entering into the higher-paid sectors and roles that have been historically dominated by men. Some of those are cultural and around perception, but some of them are actually practical. Some of them are that there's outright hostility in some places and spaces to women entering into those spaces. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as unions, we've campaigned for a number of, so what happens in workplace is governed by laws. We're a fairly practical kind of people working in the trade union movement. And so we say, well, we begin with some structures in workplaces. We begin with laws that impact on that. And we have fought very hard and campaigned very hard for a number of new laws related to pay transparency, multi-employer bargaining, same job, same pay, paid family and domestic violence leave. That was first delivered through enterprise bargaining at a small regional council in Victoria, Surf Coast Shire. And then other unions picked that up and negotiated that in enterprise bargaining agreements. And over the course of around 10, 11 years, that has now become part of the NES. So it's now available to all workers. There are also new rights in the Sex Discrimination Act, and Mary's talked about the fact that there are new obligations in the Workplace Gender Equality Act, including a requirement that WGEA publish pay gaps. And I have to tell you, in the trade union movement, we love that, because there are lots of employers that will tell us from across the table how marvellous an employer they are, and we now have some independent data that tells us how marvellous an employer they may or may not be. And we've also fought very hard for pay increases for low-paid women workers in the care sector. So aged care workers and early childhood educators, through their unions, have worked incredibly hard to make change. If we could go to the next slide, please. And then at a state level, we know here in Victoria, I won't go into this in great detail, but we know that Victoria has a nation-leading Victorian Public Sector Gender Equality Act and Commissioner. We started campaigning in 2015 for gender-based violence to be seen not just as a rights and equity issue, but also just as an occupational health and safety issue, in that it harms workers and causes both psychological and physical harm. And as a result of that campaigning work, now that framework has been adopted, and now WorkSafe is now prosecuting employers for cases and instances of sexual harassment in workplaces on the basis that it's harming workers. And we've been campaigning incredibly hard, for example, to get non-disclosure agreements banned in the case of sexual harassment matters, because we believe that they silence workers from being able to talk about a widespread and systemic problem. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit specifically then. I've talked about the role, what I believe the role of unions is. And when the question is asked, what is the answer to changing gender inequality in workplaces, I'm going to pitch to you that one of the answers is you all need to join and become active in your trade unions. If we could go to the next slide. So, what difference do unions make to the lives of workers? Well, we know, according to ABS data, that union members in Australia earn on average $251 more per week than non-unionised workers. We know that that gap is even bigger for part-time and casual workers, and we know that women are clustered in part-time and casual work. We know that union-lodged workplace bargaining agreements pay consistently higher wages than non-union agreements, and that's according to Fair Work Commission data. According to US data, and a lot of research says that unionised women earn more than non-unionised women, 20% more. But most importantly, we know that the gender pay gap is smaller in unionised workplaces, and that's as a result of greater pay transparency, the outcomes of collective bargaining, and the fact that unions act as a compliance and enforcement mechanism. So we know that unionised workplaces are better workplaces, and that comes from a frame that is the model, the top-down model, which is that change is initiated at the top, generally means that change happens at the pace and in the way that those in power are most comfortable. And our experience as unions is that people in power are often relatively comfortable with where the situation is because that situation has led to them being in power. So the change that they are prepared to see is not change at the pace and in the way that workers who are experiencing oppression might want to see. So, in terms of what we in the union movement are doing, if we could go to the next slide. So we focus a lot on training for workers, activists, unions, and also for training for employers. And that might be training around why it is that gender-based violence is an occupational health and safety issue, which means that employers are obliged, they are obligated to create safe workplaces. That's a positive proactive duty, which means they should be taking steps to do something about that now rather than wait for instances to occur. We provide a lot of information and resources on the basis that workers who know and understand their rights and women workers who know and understand, for instance, all of those changes to the laws are actually better placed to take action in relation to addressing issues. We run a lot of women's leadership development programs. A lot of unions have their own women's leadership development programs. And here at the Hall, we run a cross-sector, cross-union women's leadership program, which is aimed at identifying activists who are then going to step up and take on leadership roles. We also, at the moment, are running there are various programs run across different unions in historically male-dominated trades and occupations that are about addressing the barriers faced by women in terms of those industries. So we understand those problems fall into attraction, recruitment, and retention. We know that women don't often see those historically male-dominated trades and industries and roles as a place to go. And so it's about how do we go out and give women the opportunity to see these jobs, these well-paid jobs, as something that they could do. We also know that employers need to positively and proactively change how they do some of their recruitment so that that's not a barrier. And then we know retention is an issue, and that's about changing workplace cultures. So there are a lot of programs being run by unions in collaboration with employers around addressing those things, and we're running a similar program to that here at the Hall. We're also, unions run, and we in particular are running programs around addressing sexual harassment and discrimination experienced by women in high-risk industries, for example, hospitality, and among high-risk cohorts. So that's young workers and migrant workers, because we know that those kinds of programs that we know that, as Lisa talked about, that there are systemic ways that we can address cultures that are harming workers. We know, for example, that where there is one worker experiencing sexual harassment, you can pretty much guarantee that there are poor cultures that are allowing that to happen. And there are things that we can do to address the systems that mean that those things are less likely to occur, including better reporting mechanisms, better mechanisms to deal with it. And in addition to that, there's the work that we do as a trade union movement that is continuously advocating, lobbying, and on-the-ground campaigning. So rather than understanding, and that's about building power, that's about building collectives of women who are prepared to stand up and make change in their workplaces, in their industries, and across industries. So an example of that might be around gender-based violence in workplaces, the campaign that we have been running for a number of years now to eliminate the use of non-disclosure agreements in sexual harassment matters, and the campaign that we are running in order to achieve reproductive health leave and accommodations in workplaces. Those things are fundamentally about making sure that workplaces are structured in ways that are inclusive and support women and allow women to achieve true equality in workplaces. And that's the end of my presentation. Thanks, Michaela.
Ta-da!
Ta-da!
Thank you, Will. I think you brought a really valuable, different perspective to the discussion so far. We've been joined by Chanelle Pearson, who's the Chief of Staff at the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So I will just add you to the spotlight there, Chanelle, and pass over to you to share your experiences and your ideas for closing the gender pay gap.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm joining you from today, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present, as well as to any First Nations people joining us on the call today. It's a huge privilege to be here joining Mary, Lisa, Will and Chris, and hello to all of you who are joining from your desks. Conversations like this matter, as Will was talking about, the role that unions play. So think of us, the Victorian Chamber, is playing that similar role for businesses. Essentially, we want to influence and empower businesses to embrace those best practices as well. For those of you who may not know us, the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry is the state's largest and most influential not-for-profit business organisation. So we represent more than 100,000 businesses and clients right across the state. So that ranges everything from bakeries in regional towns to some of Australia's biggest corporate powerhouses. Our mission is simple but powerful: to help businesses start, grow and thrive. And part of that is embracing gender equity practices. We do that through training and development, advocacy, events and programs that deliver real lasting change. Gender equity isn't just a side project for us. It's a real principle that's embedded in everything that we do. And I'll be telling you a bit about that today. We're proud to be an employer of choice for gender equality, recognised by Mary's Workplace Gender Equality Agency for 2023-2025. And that's a recognition that's earned by only 115 organisations across the country. So when you think about that, it's pretty powerful that little old Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry is within those 115 organisations. We were one of 8 first-time applicants to achieve it, and we're the only industry association to have it. And it's not a trophy on the shelf, it's a benchmark of best practice. It reflects our flexible work policies, pay equity initiatives, leadership pathways, and our commitment to respectful workplaces. So I suppose you could say that we're leading by example, because of course we are in front of businesses every day. And it means that across our board, we have equal representation, 4% for women and 4 men. When you think about the stats that Mary gave earlier, I think that's pretty impressive. And in our executive council, women actually outnumber men 7-6. We also have a current split of 4 women and 4 men in our executive team, which will soon be skewed towards women when our new Chief Executive, Sally Curtin, replaces Paul Guerra next month. But I must note that Paul has been a fabulous champion of gender equity. It means that we're aiming for gender pay equity in like-for-like roles by 2026, and it means that we hold ourselves here at the Chamber publicly accountable as well. And it's important because, as we've heard earlier from Lisa, research shows that companies with gender balanced leadership are more profitable, more innovative, and more attractive to talent. So it's a bit of carrot and stick, I suppose. So when you look at the data, McKinsey's Diversity Wins report found that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams are 25% more likely to have above average profitability. That's the business case. Diversity of life experience, perspective, and leadership approaches create the best workplaces. So if we have a boardroom filled with people of the same race, gender, background, and experience, not just gender, all of those attributes, we're only getting one view of the world. And if you don't embrace diversity in business, and if you don't strive for it, you're doing yourself a major disservice. So our clients and customers, of course, every business right across the state, they're diverse. Therefore, we need to have leadership that understands them, their needs, and what will appeal. And it's similar for most of the companies and entities, actually. When you think of, all the companies, governments, they're representing such a broad base. We should be ensuring that we're servicing that base. One of the Victorian Chamber's proudest initiatives is Chamber Change. That's our Women in Business program, which was launched in 2022. We just wound up our 9th program and 500 women have gone through it, with many saying that it's literally changed their lives. So when our Chief Executive, Paul Guerra, and I were designing the program quite a few years ago, Mary was one of the first incredible women that we looked to for advice and guidance. So I thank you for that, Mary. Who would have thought that those meetings across a computer screen, much like this during the dying days of the pandemic, would have ended up where we are today with this program that's really shaped a big part of, our perspective around gender equity and our connection to the business community around this topic as well. So we're exploring issues through that program. And again, we've touched on these today as things that hold us back: imposter syndrome, work-life balance, mental load, the challenges of male-dominated workplaces, and other issues that are unique to women, which have been touched on. It's guided by our champions. So these are CEOs, vice chancellors, board members who share their warts and all accounts of how they got to where they are and their advice to others. So basically, if you can see it, you can be it. Our incoming Chief Executive, Sally Curtin, is actually one of our champions who has been part of Chamber Change since its inception. So she is definitely a CEO who is gender attuned. I'm sure you'll be happy to know, Mary. And the results speak for themselves. Participants tell us that it's built their confidence, accelerated their careers, and opened networks that last a lifetime. One alumni recently told us she landed her first executive role within months of completing the program, not because she suddenly gained some new life skill, but because she now had the confidence and inspiration to put herself forward. One of the expressions that comes out quite a lot that I love is courage before confidence, and that emerged out of Chamber Change. The program was a finalist in the World Chambers competition at the 13th World Chambers Congress in Geneva in June 2023. And thanks to the federal government's Advancing Gender Equality in Gender Segregated Industries initiative, we're in the process of taking Chamber Change national. So through an Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry grant, we've been resourced to train and coach all the other state and territory chambers across the country to implement their own Chamber Change programs. So it's pretty special that we've been given that opportunity to share what we've created here in Victoria, right across the country and across the globe. But empowerment only matters, of course, as we've heard today, if workplaces are safe, and that's why we're delivering safe workplaces for women, the initiative which we're running actually alongside Will and our friends at the Victorian Trades Hall Council and the Working Women's Centre Victoria. So that's been backed by state government funding as well. So it's a practical on-the-ground support for employers, particularly SMEs, to understand their legal responsibilities, to prevent harassment and build cultures of respect, because every woman, no matter where she works, deserves to feel safe and valued. So I suppose if you can think of that partnership between the union movement and us as the Industry Association for Employers, we're kind of coming at it from both angles. So in just 13 days as well, we'll be hosting the World Chambers Congress, the 14th, bringing together 1,000 businesses, governments and chamber leaders from across 100 countries. So as part of that, our Chamber Change program will be a great example of how gender equality drives economic performance, because when we know that when women participate fully in the workforce, we all benefit, the economy, communities and families. I'm also moderating a session on impactful leadership, which will be featuring a powerhouse lineup of impressive leaders from here and abroad. Among the headliners of this Congress are our very own Governor and Premier. And I'm sure, so most of you have been to many conferences. Again, if we were in person, I'd ask you all to put your hand up, and I'm sure there'd be many of those where it's a total bloke fest. So it still happens to this day. I see it a lot and I shake my head every time. So it's something that we were really cognizant of when planning this global congress, to ensure that we had not just diversity of gender, but also diversity in all other attributes as well. So essentially, to wrap up, at the Victorian Chamber, we believe that a stronger Victoria is a fairer Victoria. Employers definitely have a role there. The work isn't done, but progress is real. As we've heard today, we're in good hands, and we'll keep working alongside all of you, not just talking about equality, but delivering it. And let's see this Equal Pay Day as a line in the sand, but also a checkpoint on a shared journey. So it's a journey that we know that ends with talent, opportunity, and reward being matched to not just gender, but to merit as well. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Chanelle. We're now going to go to the panel and hear a little bit more from them about some of the items that they've shared with us today, but specifically respond to some questions that we've had along the way as well. The first one's a big one, but I think a good one. And it's talking about what, if you had a magic wand, in 12 months' time, what is the biggest enabler to close the gender pay gap that you would like to see introduced? So you've got a magic wand. There's one thing you can do to change it, to reduce the gender pay gap. What would it be? So I might go to Mary first.
Okay, thanks, Michaela. Look, I think the really intractable issue, or the cultural issue that we need to really address is stereotypes, gender stereotypes, because I think they play through in so many different ways, whether it's, subjects that girls and boys are taking at school, expectations around careers that are reinforced from very early age all the way through, and then through to ideal worker norms of always available 24/7, and what is a leader. And often when you talk about ideal workers and leaders, the concept is still men as well. So really working out how we reduce the gender stereotypes that are so embedded into not only the way we work, but the way we bring up our children and the way that we socialize at parties and all of those sorts of things. I think that's probably a really hard but vital driver of what we're experiencing in the workplace.
It's a pretty good use of the magic wand, Mary. Thank you. I'll go to Lisa now. If you could change one thing over the next 12 months to close the gender pay gap, what would it be?
So hard questions, Michaela, but good question, because I immediately panicked. I argued this point in last year in an opinion piece I released on International Women's Day, and I think this is the thing that would make the biggest difference. I think we should automatically give all those employees and workers in female-dominated roles a 12 to 15% pay rise. We know, for example, that the gender pay gap in those female-dominated areas is more than that. But as I argued, I think last year, we should be able to give at least that pay increase, and stop this idea that we have to go through these convoluted legal processes to fix the problem that we know is established at the base level, and it drags and draws things out. So that, I'd say, would be a base level payment that should be afforded to all of those workers in those female dominated industries, and that would give us some time to then look at the rest that needs to happen. Because we know that won't fix the gender pay gap totally in those areas, but I think it would be a really good foundation point. And I add to that, my opinion piece was in the conversation last year, if you want to look it up. So
thanks, Lisa. Over to you, Will. What are you doing with the magic wand?
Look, I have 3 answers to this. I have a 3-pronged answer. My baseline is we have to smash the patriarchy. My second answer is a women's strike. But the answer that seems like in terms of the kind of framework that we're talking about today, I would like to end gender segregation in workplaces entirely. That would be my, if I could, which goes to Mary's point around, the assumptions that we have about work that is done by women, and goes to Lisa's point, which is about we need to raise the wages of workers in what are currently female-dominated sectors, to properly reflect the value of that work and to properly reflect the kind of need that we have for that work to be done. But I'd go the next step and just say, let's just get rid of gender segregation in its entirety.
Good one. Everyone is using their magic wands very, very wisely. And I love how they're all complementing each other as well. And they all align with the key drivers for what we're seeing with the gender pay gap. Chanelle, what have you come up with?
Yeah, look, mine again is quite similar. I'd like to see us resetting the narrative, particularly around work from home and flexible work, and this just being good for women. I think during COVID, we did see that, men who had to work from home, or took on more of that caring responsibility, and just the assumption that women are the ones who are the carers and who are looking after the household, I think does us a huge disservice. That reinforcing that is not helpful. We know that if you're seen in the workplace, you're in attendance, as we were talking about earlier, you're able to sort of work hard, put in the overtime, that they're unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, they're the people who are going to get promoted. They're the people who are going to be recognised. And when we keep saying that work from home is just good for women, to me, we are just reinforcing that. And I don't think that's helpful for us.
Can I build on that, Michaela?
You sure can.
Look at us in agreement. Look at us. That's amazing. I would build on that by saying, I think we need to be better at having the conversation about how workplaces where women are treated well, where women are safe, respected, and equal, are actually better workplaces for everyone. When we put in place good systems and schemes for reporting issues that might arise, so when workplaces are safer, when we talk about workplaces that are inclusive of women, actually what we do to make that happen benefits everyone. All workers benefit from that. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to emphasise that these are, improvements for women and the oppression that women experience. But I think we need to get better at telling that story, that actually workplaces where you can easily work from home, where there is greater flexibility to balance work and care, workplaces that are more inclusive are actually better for everyone. All workers benefit from that.
We'll come to you, Lisa, and then we've got a couple of other questions that we'll move to as well.
So we're having this chat and we're not letting anyone's questions get in, but just wanted to follow that up. For example, that's why I think we've got to be really, really mindful of how we are describing policy reform that we want, or legislative reform that we want. If we, for example, if you take the moment that we're in, the debate that we're in currently in relation to working from home and flexible work that Chanelle raised, then, if we say that those things are predominantly only available for people who've got family and caring responsibilities, the difficulty that those things are important for people who've got family and caring responsibilities. The difficulty that we've got in Australia is because we come from such a strong breadwinner model of the way we live, that we've still got that issue that we're dealing with, that women are predominantly performing those jobs. So we get into that cycle of making it better for women, and that's important, but at the same time potentially reinforcing those gender norms and those gender frameworks. So that's why we really need to be thinking about, when we're arguing for policy reform, when we're arguing for legislative change or anything like that, that we make sure that we're not reinforcing the gender norms that have been problematic in the past, and we're advancing and transforming the way forward, I think.